I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not out loud, just to yourself. When was the last time someone asked you how your business was going and you actually told them the truth? Not the polished version, not the version where you smile and say, things are great, and then change the subject. I mean the real answer, the one where you admit that your best employee gave notice last Tuesday and that you have been sick to your stomach about it ever since. Or the one where you admit, confess that revenue is up 30%, but you have never felt more overwhelmed in your life. Or the really honest one, the one where you barely admit to yourself, the one where you wonder if you even like what you built anymore. When was that last time you said that version out loud to another human being? If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone. And that is exactly what I want to talk about today. Welcome to the Making of Her. I'm Dr. Meghna Dasani, and today's episode is a little different. I am not teaching a framework. I am not walking you through a mindset shift. Today, I want to have a conversation about something I have been carrying for a while, something I have watched play out in hundreds of women, and something I am finally doing about it. Today, we're talking about loneliness, specifically the kind of loneliness that nobody warns you when you decide to build something in healthcare. And before you click away because you think that it's about to get heavy or sad, hold on. This is actually one of the most hopeful episodes I have ever recorded because the problem is real, but the solution is closer than you think. See, when I bought my dental practice in 2005, I had this picture in my head of what ownership would look like. I would be my own boss. I would set my own hours. I would finally have the flexibility to be present for my girls. And I imagined myself surrounded by people who understood what I was building, people who could sit with me over coffee and help me think through the hard stuff. That last part never happened. What actually happened was that on day one, my entire team quit. And in the chaos that followed, I discovered something nobody had told me about ownership. The higher you climb, the fewer people can see you clearly. My husband was supportive. Oh gosh, he still is. But he did not understand what it meant to manage a clinical schedule, right? My friends, they thought I was brave, but they could not help me figure out why my new front desk person was driving away patients. My parents were proud, but their version of business advice came from a completely different era and a completely different country. I was surrounded by people who loved me, and I had never felt more alone in a professional decision in my life. Now, here's the part that really got me. I kept thinking it would get better, that once I got through that hard first year, I would find my people. The other women dentists who owned practices, the other moms who were building something while raising kids, the women who woke up at 5 a.m. because they had a staff meeting at 7 and a patient at 8 and a soccer game at 4 and a budget review somewhere in between. But the rooms where those women were supposed to be, they did not exist. Not really. Yes, there were dental conferences where I could learn and earn CE credits and talk about clinical techniques. There were women networking groups that were mostly about exchanging business cards. Sometimes there were bad wine. There were Facebook groups for sure, where someone could post a question and 50 strangers gave often helpful, but sometimes contradictory advice and then argue about it in the comments. And then there were masterminds that cost $20,000, and were mostly full of men who talked about scaling like it was a video game. None of those were the room that I was looking for. The room that I needed was small, intimate, full of women who could look at me and say, I know exactly what it feels like because I live it too. I did not need that room to be full of dentists. I just needed a community of women in healthcare, women who got it, women who carried the same strange combination of clinical identity and entrepreneurial ambition and guilt about missing bedtime and pride about what they had built and terror about what might fall apart. See, that room did not exist for me in 2005. It barely existed in 2010 or in 2015. Honestly, for most women in healthcare, it does not exist today. I want to be specific about why this loneliness is different from regular professional isolation. It's not just about being a business owner. Plenty of entrepreneurs feel isolated. It's also not just about being a woman in a leadership role. That has its own challenges for sure, but there are good communities for that. What makes healthcare entrepreneurship uniquely isolating is the combination. Think about it. You have a clinical identity. You went to school for years, you trained, you took boards, you earned letters after your name. That identity comes with a very specific set of expectations from the world. You are supposed to be caring, measured, evidence based, service oriented. The people who sit in your chair or lie on your table or sit across from you in a therapy session, they're trusting you with their bodies, their health, their most vulnerable secrets. And then you also have that entrepreneurial identity. You have to think about revenue. You have to think about marketing and hiring and firing and bringing in new patients and meeting goals and making numbers and lease negotiations and insurance credentialing and profit margins. Gosh, I'm exhausted just talking about it. You have to be strategic, competitive even, right? You have to make decisions that sometimes prioritize the business over a patient experience. And those decisions keep you up at night because they feel like betrayals of that first identity. These two identities are in constant tension, and very few people in your life understand both of them at the same time. I cannot tell you how many times I sat in a room full of dentists and I wanted to ask a business question, but felt like I would be seen as stupid, mercenary, or I sat in a room full of entrepreneurs and felt like nobody understood why I could not just fire the underperforming team member. Because in healthcare, continuity of care actually matters. And patients form attachments to the people who treat them. And then there are licensure and compliance implications that a tech startup founder would never even think about. The result is that you end up translating constantly. You translate your healthcare experience into the business world. You translate your business ambitions for your clinical peers. And somewhere in all of that translating, you lose the ability to just be yourself fully, completely in a single room. That, that is the loneliness I am talking about. It's not that nobody cares. It's that nobody speaks both languages. Here's what I have learned from 2 decades on this path and from working closely with hundreds of women in healthcare. Isolation is not just uncomfortable, it is expensive. And I don't mean financially, although that too. I mean it costs us in decisions. When you do not have a room full of people who understand your world, you make decisions in a vacuum. You agonize over choices that, with the right perspective, would take maybe 10 minutes. Should I bring on an associate? Should I renegotiate my lease? Should I even confront this team member? Should I raise my fees? Oh my gosh, is it time to sell? Can I afford to take a real vacation? These are not small questions. And when you are turning them over alone in your head at midnight, they grow teeth. Haha, get that dental reference there? They become bigger than they actually are. The decision becomes tangled up with your identity, your fear of failure, your guilt about what you might be neglecting by even thinking about growth. But here is what happens when you put that same question in a room of 5, 7, 8 women who have faced something similar. One of them says, I did that last year, and here's what I wish I'd known. Another says, I'm facing this exact same thing right now. Can we talk through this together? The third one asks the question you had not thought to ask yourself. And suddenly, that decision, the one that has been eating you alive for 3 weeks, it becomes manageable. Not easy, manageable, which is all it ever needed to be. The cost of not having that room is not dramatic. Nobody collapses. Nobody goes bankrupt overnight. But that cost is slow. It is the accumulation of decisions made slightly worse than they needed to be. Opportunities evaluated with slightly too much fear. Wins celebrated with slightly too little joy because there was no one there to reflect them back to you. Over 10 years, that slow cost compounds into something enormous. It compounds into the woman who built an incredible practice, but she cannot enjoy it. The physician who expanded to 3 locations, but feels like she's running on a treadmill she cannot step off. The therapist who is brilliant with her patients, but has no idea how to grow without losing herself. I have been that woman, and I am willing to bet you have been her too. Who knows? Maybe you are her right now. So I built that room. I have been thinking about this for years, and honestly, I kept talking myself out of it. I kept thinking someone else would build it. Some platform or organization or conference would figure out that women in healthcare entrepreneurship need something specifically designed for us, and that the room would just magically appear. Well, it did not magically appear. So I am making it. And this is actually the first time I am putting it in words outside of my family and I. It is called the Third Space Collective, and the name matters. So let me tell you where it comes from. See, in sociology, there is this concept of the first space, the second space, and the third space. Your first space is home. Your second space is work. And the third space is the place where community happens. It's the coffee shop. It's the neighborhood bar, the park bench, where the same people gather on Saturday mornings. It's the place that is not about obligation or productivity. It's just about being human with other humans. For women who build in healthcare, the lines between the first and the second space blur until they almost disappear. Your practice is personal. Your home life is shaped by the demands of the business. Your phone buzzes with patient emergencies during dinner, and financial reviews happen during bedtime stories. The 2 spaces collapse into each other, and there is no room left for the third one, which is why the Third Space Collective is going to be that third room. Not your home, not your practice. It is the place where you get to show up as the full, unedited, ambitious, tired, brilliant, uncertain, brave version of yourself. And every other woman in that room is doing the exact same thing. I want to tell you something that I have not really said publicly before. The loneliest I ever felt in my career was not during that terrible first year. I mean, that was brutal. But I expected it to be hard, right? I was in survival mode, and survival mode has a strange kind of clarity to it. You just do the next thing. The loneliest I ever felt was about 10 years in. My practice was thriving. I had a great team. I still do. I was writing books, publishing articles. I was speaking at conferences, pioneering work in sleep dentistry that was genuinely changing patients' lives. On paper, I had. I had it all. I had made it. And I remember standing in my kitchen one evening making dinner, and my oldest daughter asked me something about school. And I responded, but I was not really there. I was thinking about a staffing decision I needed to make by Friday. And she looked at me with this expression that 12-year-olds have perfected, this mixture of patience and disappointment. And she said, Mom, you're not listening. You know what? She was right. I was not. And the thing that gutted me was not the guilt. I am used to the guilt. Every working mother lives with that particular roommate, right? What gutted me was that I had nobody to call and say, this just happened and I feel terrible and I do not know if I'm doing this right. My husband would have said the right thing, but he would not have felt it in his bones the way I needed someone, another woman who worked her tail off in healthcare would have felt it. My colleagues would have nodded, but they were not running businesses and raising kids and carrying the same impossible equation. I needed a woman, someone who had stood in her own kitchen, having her own version of that exact moment. And you know what? She did not exist in my life. That's why I knew I had to build this. Not because I have a business plan or a revenue target, but because I remember the kitchen. And I know right now, somewhere, a woman who's listening to the show is standing in her kitchen, not listening to her own daughter, and she thinks that she is the only one. She is not. And she should not have to feel like she is. Here's what I want to say to you, and I'm going to say it very simply. If anything I have said today describes or sounds familiar, describes who you are, if you have felt that specific loneliness of building in healthcare, if you have wished for a room full of women who speak both languages, if you're tired of translating your experience for people who love you but cannot quite see you, I want you in this room. I have spent 20 years in healthcare, and I have spent the last several years actually mentoring women who are building incredible things. And the pattern I keep seeing is the same one I lived. Brilliant women making harder decisions than most people will ever face, doing it without a room that holds all of who they are. See, I cannot go back and give myself that room in 2005. But I can build it now for you, for the woman who is driving to her practice tomorrow morning, who listened to this episode in the car and felt something shift. That room is real right now. There's a seat in it with your name on it. Thank you for being here. I mean that in the way that only someone who knows what it feels like to carry all of this can mean it. I will see you next week.